Greetings to all of you who've gathered to commemorate the defeat of Derek Beackon and the BNP on the Isle of Dogs back in 1994. It was a really significant bit of our family history, as well as of the community, and we're really sorry not to be with you. The sense of shock when Derek Beackon was elected was really very difficult to handle. I can remember somebody saying to me the following morning that the silence at the school gates was deafening, and we didn't know how to talk about it. And in church the following Sunday, I asked people to write on a board how they felt and what we could do. The feelings were really desolate. One man left church that morning saying, "I fought the Nazis in the war, and now we've elected them in."
It was a terrible night because there was a real sense of shock. There had been before that a clear sense that racism was on the rise. The Liberal Party, which ran the council at the time, had clearly paved the way for that with its now infamous slogan of "Island Homes for Island People." And there were offshoots from that, various local groups who took that a little bit further. And it was in that climate that the BNP had already stood in a previous election and had got quite a significant vote. And
it was almost like overnight there was this great big BNP presence on the island. In those days, obviously the island was a lot less developed than it is today, and there really was a kind of villagey feel to the Isle of Dogs. And a lot of the people that lived there had lived there for generations. Their parents, their grandparents had been dockers, and it really did feel like a village. That almost changed overnight when all of a sudden, I remember it was a Saturday morning, and being the good housewife that I was cleaning the windows, as you do, and there was like this mini demonstration along Manchester Road. There was only like 3 or 4 BNP yobs with pit bulls and Union Jacks shouting racist slogans walking along Manchester Road, and I was absolutely horrified because I'd never seen or experienced anything like this before. So I started screaming out the window at them, you know, "If you're so brave, why don't you go and march in Tottenham?"
This was the first time that a BNP or fascist candidate had ever been elected in, as far as we knew, in a council anywhere in the country. Obviously they'd been around for a long time, causing a lot of trouble, and there'd been lots of demonstrations, counter demonstrations, etc. But this was new ground, and you know, we're experienced enough to understand that if somebody could get elected in Tower Hamlets, they could get elected in similar areas elsewhere in the country. Basic things like making it clear to the neighbourhood that no members of staff wanted any direct contact with Derek Beackon, and any communication he wanted to make would have to be through the neighbourhood manager.
The run up to Beackon get elected, you could feel something in the air. 1993, people forget, was a scary year. In April, Stephen Lawrence got murdered in South London. The week after, the BNP marched past the spot where he died. They had a headquarters in Welling. There was a sense of the BNP growing and feeling himself a force, and then Beackon was elected. And to be elected in an inner London borough was something, I think, which really shocks people. And you felt, could the BNP be a force which was now going to be able to seize on the seething frustration there was in an area? And if you look, we can't see it from here, but if you look at Canary Wharf, and you can imagine what it was like when Canary Wharf and those palaces of wealth were being built, and around them people felt their own lives were very harsh, getting worse, hard to find homes, hard to get decent healthcare, hard for the future of their kids. So people were frightened and angry.
I think there was a real shock that it could happen somewhere like Tower Hamlets, which has had a proud tradition of fighting racism. And that's something the NUT's always taken very seriously. We've always thought in the NUT that we're ideally placed to take up issues of racism and discrimination, both because of our links with the communities we serve, but also as teachers, you know, wanting to take these things up in the classroom, which is what East London NUT has always argued for. And of course, we always remember, whenever we talk about racism, that Blair Peach died 35 years ago now, who was our president of East London NUT at the time, when him and a lot other NUT members from Tower Hamlets went over to Southall to protest against the BNP. And he was murdered.
I remember one of our colleagues, she was a Hong Kong Chinese woman who was working as a school nurse, and she was sitting at the bus stop in Crisp Street waiting for a bus, and people came along and started racially abusing her and attacked her. And we were just really horrified that, one of our colleagues who was working in the community was treated like that. And we decided that we had to do something. We spoke to various people. And I think it was the following day, a large group of health workers from the Crisp Street practice, from Limehouse where I'm working now, from Bromley by Bow, some people from the schools, from the local Tower Hamlets College, people met up in Crisp Street Market, and we gave out leaflets and petitions, had a megaphone against the BNP.
Health workers we come from all kinds of backgrounds, and so people were fearful at first. They were very fearful of district nurses, etc., fearful about visiting patients on the Isle of Dogs because there was this real shock and fear. But the campaign, gradually as the campaign increased and health workers were involved in it very much, we began to shift, the atmosphere. We as health workers made a very clear statement that we felt this was associated with the election of Derek Beackon, creating this kind of racist mood and giving racist thugs the confidence to attack people.
Because we've been through a very bad form of racism in the late 70s and early 80s, where we used to dread going to school. Almost every day there was we lived in fear. People actually feared going to the Isle of Dogs. When the council offered them any homes there, and people refused. Nobody wanted to go and live there at that time because people felt that it was a place of BNP or the National Front. Beacon's election gave some sort of confidence back to the racists that they're still around and they still have some sort of power, and that they can continue with their racist agenda.
I'd sort of dropped out of politics actively, so it was a real shock to me when I came home, went to vote, and then in the morning, or later that night, we heard that BNP councillor had been elected in that by-election in September 1993.
So that must have been a real shock to people.
It was, yeah. Obviously in the Labour Party in particular, because we had lost, and every party member was asked to write down what they thought had gone wrong and what we needed to do. So I wrote a 2-page letter and just sent it in as a party member, and then I got a letter back saying we're interested in what you've written, and you might want to consider standing as a candidate for the elections in May of 1994.
And it was a dark day, one of the saddest day I would say in our political history. Absolutely shocked, because there were a lot of, leading up to a period, there were incidents of racial tension, prejudice, people being called names, picked on, especially in the Docklands. There's a lot of fear around amongst the Asian and black community at the time. So, and for that to end in a victory for the BNP and Derek Beackon in a modern era in Tower Hamlets was a total shock.
Tower Hamlets had gone through this massive period of change, and there was a big overtone of racism, and a lot of us have been involved from all sorts of parts of the spectrum in demonstrating and protesting and activating against the BNP and the National Front in Bethnal Green and so on. So there was that backdrop. There was also, towards the end of the Thatcher period, people wondering where their job was going to come from, whether the world was just being imposed on them from the outside. There were big cuts in spending, and people feeling that they and their kids may not have a future. And there was, as I said, a populist Liberal council, which was, in my opinion, dividing the community. It sent an earthquake through the whole country.
A lot of people started using abusive words. From the beginning, we were getting name called. I never played. When I moved there, I was about 14 or 15. I was never able to play in the park, or they would chase us with their dogs. And the worst thing that happened to us when Drake got elected was my brother. He was only 14. He was coming home. It was like a middle of sometime in the afternoon, broad sunlight. He was just trying to get inside the building, and suddenly he saw big people, like a 40 men behind him with machetes and whatever, baseball bats and stuff, and they wanted to hit him badly, and then he started running. My mom was in tears, crying, because My brother went missing.
What was really frightening about Derek Beackon getting elected was that he wasn't just any old racist, or from a racist organisation. He was clearly a Nazi. He was photographed Sieg Heiling, and one of the first interviews he gave after he got elected, he spoke about the Asian population as rubbish, that he wanted to sweep from the streets.
And then the attack on Mukhtar Ahmed, who was a little bit older, took place, and that was another very serious attack, took place a few weeks later. But this was in the context of a 200% rise in reported racist attacks in Tower Hamlets over that period of time.
You know, I was 22, 23. You know, forgive me for not getting the completely political perspective, but I didn't expect it to happen, to be honest. And I wasn't even there for the count on the Isle of Dogs when he got elected. I can't remember what I was doing, but I do remember watching Channel 4 News. And I still get this kind of feeling in the pit of my stomach, this physical feeling of watching the footage. And actually people that I knew, anti-fascist, anti-racist, being chased along the street. I think it was called Marsh Wall, I remember. And seeing a particular person that I knew, Sandy, he was hiding underneath a car, do you know what I mean? Just thinking, why am I here? I should be there. And just the shock. I mean, I'm an East Ender, I live in the East End.
We collected the ideas about what to do and generated an action programme. And each Sunday night, once a month, 30 or so of us would meet from each of the churches on the Isle of Dogs to try to work out what to do. And lots of the other organisations seemed to have imploded for a bit. And the churches started to create a response which involved all sorts of people. And the really best bit was the way in which the community worked together. I can remember there were island mums against the BNP, comics against the Nazis, and all sorts of people working in a very creative way to try to make sure that truth was told, issues were addressed, and bridges were made across barriers where people weren't meeting and weren't working together. And that was how we managed to defeat the BNP in the end. It was thoughtful, clever, prayerful, people working together across all the community in such a way as Derek Beackon lost his seat and the BNP lost their footing in Tower Hamlets. It didn't always feel that that would be so, and there were people coming from all over the world in order to watch the way in which the far right was rising.
I think most people underrated the chances of Derek Beackon getting elected. So when he was elected by 7 votes, people were genuinely shocked. We'd already arranged beforehand that we'd have a meeting of Isle of Dogs staff, because he'd been elected in Millwall first thing in the morning.
Normally, when we used to have union meetings, you'd have like half a dozen, maybe a dozen people in the council chamber, if you were lucky. The council chamber was absolutely packed. Everybody. It just felt like everybody who worked on the island that day came to the meeting. And there was a lot of activity outside of the buildings. Sky News were outside. There was lots of, there was local papers, etc. Anyway, so we were in the council chamber, absolutely packed, and the chief execs were trying to reassure the workforce that despite the election and the fact that we had a BNP councillor, that it had to be business as usual, and as employers we had a duty of care to staff, etc., etc. And people were asking questions about, well, what happens if the BNP wanders into one of the local housing offices and starts racially abusing a member of staff? How are you going to guarantee protection there? And people were just asking lots and lots of questions. And the debate wasn't really going anywhere. And I was just getting more and more frustrated. And I just turned around and I said, well, I think we need to walk out. I said, the eyes of the world are on us. I said, and I think we need to show a really clear message to the BNP that we're not prepared to work with them. I said, and we're not going to tolerate this. And I never forget it. Some guy stood up and he said, oh, but how about all the poor old girls on the island we'll be denying a service to? I went, it's Friday afternoon, I'm the home care manager for the Isle of Dogs, and I can assure you all the poor old girls you're referring to are being well looked after. So, and then I said it again, and I think we had I can't remember, I don't know whether we had a vote, I think we must have. Anyway, we all got up and we walked out, and I remember a good mate of mine, Jude of St John, she still works in Tower Hamlets, she turned around to me and she said, Carol, she said, you've made history. And we walked out and it was on the news and it is history. It really changed the atmosphere on the island. And I think even though the people who voted for them didn't necessarily change their opinions overnight, I think what they hadn't anticipated was how it would change the atmosphere on the island and how people would start to feel threatened and it would divide the community, etc. And I think that came as a real shock to everybody.
We managed to persuade, without much effort, to be fair to the union nationally, that we needed quite a lot of money to promote our various campaigns, because we knew that there were council elections the following, I think it was May. This was September, I think, 93. There were going to be local elections in May 94. So we knew that there was a sort of 8 or 9 month period where we needed to have a concentrated action. And anyway, they agreed to a £20,000 grant. I mean, within the branch, it was a hotbed of activity.
Fantastic walkout by council workers on the island. That gave people spirit, gave people hope, gave us a sense we can stop this. Our branch threw ourselves into it. We had this badge here, Unison, United Against the Nazis. We had set up council workers against the Nazis. We had 1,000 council workers in Bedford. I remember things like the BNP coming around in Globetown and someone calling me from the one-stop shop there, and the one-stop shop workers had come out into the street and said, can you come out as well and we'll leaflet. The kind of things that people did. We produced hundreds of thousands of leaflets. This is one for the TUC march on the 19th of March. On it, that's the picture of Mukhtar Ahmed. That's the face of what fascism does. Brutally beaten. We got fantastic response right across the trade union movement. People went out, people protested, they joined the TUC demo. We went down to Welling to get the BNP's headquarters shut down, and we went door to door to people's homes. There was a bit of a myth at the time that the island was completely racist and that you couldn't talk to the white people there. And in fact, people found it's true, there was racism on the island, there were problems, but we mobilised both the Bengali community but also the white community. People were anti-racist to turn them over. Alan Thompson, who was in C18, a real thug, really vicious, nasty thug, kind of person I'm sure involved in a lot of attacks. Actually last year, just got jailed for a serious assault he committed many years ago. He had a stand selling the Evening Standard outside South Quay DLR. And local civil servants got together, started to protest. We forced the Evening Standard to take his spot away. We said no platform for the Nazis. We didn't have them in the council chamber. Remember the first meeting in Jack Dash House? We sat there. The Labour Party boycotted the meeting so they wouldn't sit on the plain platform as Beacon. The only people there were protesters. And I think it changed Tower Hamlets forever. I mean, people who come to Tower Hamlets now, you would not know Tower Hamlets from 1993 to 2014. People think of it now, it's almost a byword for multiculturalism, for a united community, which we're all very proud of. But that didn't come from nowhere. That came from determined anti-racist campaigning, and when we got rid of Beacon, it really transformed Tower Hamlets for the better. Even our schools, there was an interesting report last year into how our schools have done, and one of the things that identified was Beacon's election and the kind of electric shock that created for the area, and the realisation you had to do something to give people hope in Tower Hamlets, and a combination of fighting that anti-racist fight and fighting for a decent future.
As well as the stuff we were doing in school to reassure students and the advice we gave to teachers about that, you know, what to talk to them about, quite a lot of our activists then took to the streets to join the community campaign, and other trade unionists in leafleting and holding meetings, talking to parents. And we're very proud to, you know, of the role we played with Unison and other trade unions right across the community. And it's something Tower Hamlets has always done. You know, I think we could even see in recent years, you know, it's something that when attacked, the community really does, you know, bind together and send out a strong message that we won't be divided, and there's no place, you know, at the time we were saying no place for the BNP and Derek Beackon, and now we're saying no place for the likes of the EDL and the hate mongers.
And we organised a coach for health workers and their families, and it set off from Crisp Street Health Centre. And people came on that who'd never been on demonstrations before. I remember a very young Bengali woman who was a receptionist at Crisp Street at the time. She'd never been on a demonstration in this country. She was wearing her flimsy sandals to go on it, and I'd got my big hiking boots on because I thought it might be a difficult demonstration. Her husband came, and he'd only been in the country for 3 weeks, and he didn't understand English. But they certainly weren't scared, and they said, look, in Bangladesh we're used to water cannon, so this is fine. And they sort of just linked arms and stayed on the road.
There was the issue of defending the Barkentine Clinic, which arose halfway through the whole business. It was being run down, and it was proposed that it should be sold off, and it was just at the beginning of the development of Docklands. And there was the prospect of building a new clinic right in the middle of one of the new estates that were being built for the bankers that lived on the edge of the Thames. And a number of us felt it was really important that the clinic was built in the heart of the traditional working class part of Tower Hamlets. So we organised with local residents a meeting, and the chief executive of the Primary Care Trust came along to that meeting, and we had all members of the community, the traditional white, working class, Bangladeshis, all sorts of people were at the meeting, all clamouring for the new health centre to be redeveloped, and that was successful. You will now see a state-of-the-art health centre which was built successfully as a result of our campaign. And really what that meant was that it undercut the support that the BNP had, because what we demonstrated was that a united campaign that included people of all races and all communities could win.
Youth Connection was formed after Choudhury was attacked, by some racists. So this was a campaign, I remember, where hundreds of youth came together, and the other campaigns was the normal campaigns. Especially, we joined our hands with the people in the Isle of Dogs to make sure that everybody comes out on the day to vote and get Derek Beackon out.
We had established ourselves as candidates fairly late on. I was the last to get selected. Nobody really knew who I was, so I had to, as part of the team of three with Julia and Steve, I had to get out and about a bit and let people know who I was and what the Labour Party was doing to put things right, as it were. Then there was, I was in the church, and our vicar at the time, Nick Holtam, and his wife, they were both very active in the community, and she was leading on a what was called the Rainbow Ribbons campaign, and then there was people, broad-based campaign outside, obviously with the Anti-Nazi League.
I belonged to an organisation called CAPA, which is a civil liberties organisation in the borough. Another activist, party activist, trade unionists, general people who are involved in social movements in the borough, strongly felt that at the time I belonged to one of the major parties at the time, that the two major parties were responsible because of the infighting, because of the tension amongst the various wings of the parties, that had allowed Derek Beackon to become the first BNP councillor in the borough. That people felt that the differences must be set aside, because the the language, the hatred that the BNP and Derek Beackon represented at the time was unacceptable. A young lad called Choudhury a young Asian lad, was brutally attacked by fascists going front of a pub in Commercial Road, and there was a mini riot because there was a demonstration in support of him. He was critically ill in London Hospital, in front of the hospital, and that turned into a mini riot. That also galvanized people, was a catalyst to get people around, saying black or white, trade unionists, politicians, people of faith, no faith, young and old, need to get together and get rid of a common enemy, which was Derek Beackon.
Then we formed a group called Women Unite Against Racism, it was formed by some people around Tower Hamlets, and then we had a group of women that we used to have our meetings, and
you know, that involved women from all communities.
Yeah. It was actually organised by not Bengali people. It was organised by our mixed cultures, or like white colleagues, friends, who were with us. So it was mainly organised by them. So they involved us, and then we got involved, and we became active, like to talk about how to overcome racism and do strategic work. Like then we thought a cooking class would be really good. So if a lot of people like curry, it's like a national dish. So if we could get a Bengali woman who knows how to cook curry and show other people from other culture, like give it like a cooking session. So we had like integration time. Like we had sort of they showed how different cultures cooking. We learned from each other.
Strangely, you can look at what good news comes out of a bad thing like this, and it did help to politicise and activate the community. And in the following year's election, the Labour Party was a beneficiary. We had a landslide victory, but I think I could take that personally as a tribute to my leadership if I wanted to. But I think it's a far bigger story than that. It's about people saying, hang on a minute, we don't want to live in a borough like this where people are divided against each other. We're a community, we may have all sorts of challenges and problems, but it ain't about our neighbours, it's about the way the system works.
And we went outside Asda and started leafleting and talking to people, and from there went out to build loose grouping, which we gave the title of Isle of Dogs Against the Nazis, which I played a leading role in, and tried to pull together as many people as possible, working at all sorts of different levels to try and unseat Beackon. And there was an argument at the time, actually, which is worth mentioning, because there were lots of people who looked at the vote Beackon had got and almost took the view that if you were white and on the Isle of Dogs, somehow you were racist, and didn't believe that it was possible to go in there and talk face to face with the ordinary people on the Isle of Dogs and mobilise them to be against the BNP and win away some of the people who'd been bought. So many people did lots of fantastic work, but there was at times a shying away from driving it into the heart of the community on the Isle of Dogs itself. And those of us who lived down there knew that was false, because it was our community, we lived in the heart of it. I knew that the majority of people, black, white and Asian on the Isle of Dogs, were not racist and hated the BNP. Literally every morning, and when I say morning, people out at 6 o'clock in the morning removing Nazi posters and stickers and replacing them with anti-racist posters and stickers. By the same evening, when people came back from work, ours had been taken down and the BNP had their people out doing it, and then so that evening we were out again mobilising. Over time the numbers grew, and that went on for a while, and actually we won that campaign. There came a point, I think it was in about February, March, in the run up to the election where Beackon lost, where we knew we'd won because we put our stuff up in the morning, plastered, I think, hundreds and hundreds of posters, and for the first time that evening it stayed up and the next day, and that was really important, because that was a sense that actually we've demoralised them. They couldn't match the mobilisation. They had their core of people, but it proved that we were mobilising bigger numbers and that we were wearing them down, and psychologically that played an important role as well. And our view was anyone who wanted to do anything was welcome, and that was within the community. The local Bengali community, again, when they could have retreated in among themselves, didn't. We reached out to them. I remember myself and an old campaigner, Ted Jacks, went to a meeting in Island House on the Isle of Dogs when the local Bengali community, and there were 3 white people there, but it was important that we were there because we said to them, come join us together, we can go out and mobilise, and they played a fantastic role as well. The BNP was marching around, I think 40, 50 strong of them marching around, and we said we're not tolerating that Nazis can openly parade around our streets, so we make no apologies for it. We went out and we tried to block their passage and confronted them at that level. So the campaign took place in all of those ways. No one of them has a monopoly on the campaign. It was the combination of all of that across the whole community, people from different political, ethnic backgrounds, the different levels and methods of the campaign. It was the total package that was absolutely essential.
Another thing that I was involved with was the Sunday following his election. The British National Party used to sell their newspapers at the top of Brick Lane, and this had been going on since the 1970s, and it had not really been remarked on or noticed for a while because they were low and they weren't getting elected. But once they got someone elected, people turned out on that Sunday to stop them selling the paper. And we all turned up Sunday morning. We saw them get out of their van with the newspapers, and we didn't initially know what to do. There were a few police around, but then a group of people made a decision that actually we were going to drive them off the streets. And what was quite important for me about that at the time is we decided that women would be at the front of doing this, so that it wouldn't just look like a fight between two lots of men. Women got together, ran across the road, ran at them, grabbed their newspapers, and actually they fled. And from that day, they didn't sell at the top of Brick Lane again, so we destroyed a paper sale that they'd maintained for years. Black and white, men and women, drove them off the streets because they didn't want them here. And then what happened as part of the Anti-Nazi League was we launched a Don't Vote Nazi campaign, which really was aimed at getting people out to vote. It doesn't matter who you vote for, but don't vote for the Nazis.
A lot of young Bangladeshi people had been threatened, had been pushed about, had been subject to racist abuse. And this was a huge mobilising effect amongst young Bangladeshis who began to come on the protests but came to the meetings, were organising through their youth clubs. And it began to really engage a section of the Bangladeshi community which had, I think because of racism generally in society, had felt rather excluded and not engaged with the political process. It brought them into politics and activity in a way they hadn't been before. So I think that it was that mobilisation of the Bangladeshi community which is what kicked Beackon out. I remember going down to the Isle of Dogs on election day and just being amazed at the people streaming out of their houses and going down to the polling stations in a way that you just hadn't seen before. It was more reminiscent of South Africa in the votes, the first elections after apartheid. You know, you had queues at the polling stations of Bangladeshi women. I think a very important point in that whole process was when the TUC agreed to call an anti-racist demonstration on the 19th of March in the run-up to the elections, Unite Against Racism, and well over 50,000 people. It was led by the TUC and representatives of the local Bangladeshi community and other community representatives. And it was just an incredible sensation after having felt so beleaguered.
No, because I felt that actually there was so much of it around, but I was so wrong. And it was the kind of response of people that echoed how I was feeling that, you know, really made me feel like, yes, okay, this is definitely the right thing to do. You know, and then when I came into contact with people from the A&L, you know, I realised that actually they had a very coherent ideas about how to tackle what was going on. And, you know, and for the first time in my life, I felt, when all those things started to happen, I felt like I was part of I was a majority rather than a minority, and it was, you know, it was an incredible feeling.
Isle of Dogs for me was a bit of a cut-off place. It was like an island. You know, a lot of us in the East End just literally didn't visit it. And then, of course, it had the stigma and from my perspective, it's full of racists, but actually it wasn't at all. Very quickly, we had a very clear strategy, and that was to galvanise the widest forces available. So, for example, in the Anti-Nazi League, we had a badge for every section of workers, and really creative. So, we had, you know, nurses against the Nazis, we had engineers against the Nazis, we had gays and lesbians against the Nazis. You know, we literally, you know, we had a very clear united front aim, which was to galvanise as many forces as possible. Because actually, what we did know was that the majority of people on the Isle of Dogs and in the East End and nationally were against the Nazis. And I mean, a little thing that we had, which was like a gift that kept on coming, was we had a picture of Derek Beackon, Zeke Hiley. I mean, to have that on a leaflet was just beautiful. It was just poetry, because we could show clearly that he was a Nazi. But we were quite creative as well. You know, I was young at the time, it was 20 years ago, and I did realise quite early on that especially a lot of the young Asian and black children, because they were children, were really scared, because there was an awful lot of media coverage, and you would literally think, from looking out from the outside in, that the Isle of Dogs was just full of Nazis, full of racists. Do you know what I mean? It actually wasn't the case at all. And I think how we helped, you know, the Anti-Nazi League were absolutely instrumental, but the community was more instrumental, and it was just really a case of helping and working together in terms of a strategy and organising, because that's what we needed to do. We needed to organise. There were loads and loads of people that were anti-Nazi, loads of people that saw through the lies that they were putting forward that got them elected in the first place. At George Green School, which was a secondary school right at the southern tip of the island, you know, I was meeting young people that were really scared, and what we used to do was we used to say, well, right, let's reclaim the streets one at a time. So I'd give them stickers, and they'd go and put their stickers, Anti-Nazi League, black and white, unite and fight, stickers on their streets, and they would start to feel more confident. I own my street, I've reclaimed my street. And then I used to do things like I remember every Thursday afternoon at 4:30, you know, meet particular groups of kids, you know, and sometimes like 20, 30 kids, and they'd replenish their stocks of stickers, and just small things like that made them feel much more confident. They were part of something wider, they were part of a campaign, and they were part of a campaign. 23 at the time of the campaign, and when I look back, I don't think I had that many role models, and actually I think my experience on the Isle of Dogs was quite transformative, and actually I found the young people really inspiring. I found a lot of the pensioners really inspiring. I found the workers, the trade unions really inspiring. But I'd just like to mention one person that was truly inspiring for me, and her name was Julie Waterson. She was instrumental in setting up the Anti-Nazi League the second time around, and she was instrumental in just keeping me going, because it was hard work for those months and months and months of that campaign. So I think it's really important that Julie Waterson is mentioned, not just mentioned, but celebrated for her part in the campaign on the Isle of Dogs.
It was a great victory. The following morning, after the May elections, I can remember going into the Pier Tavern and the most wonderful party going on, with people from the neighbourhood offices and community groups all celebrating together. I hope that's what you do with this celebration too, to commemorate a great victory.
Euphoric is the only word I can use. I was privileged enough to be inside the old town hall in York Hall when the count was taking place. And there was a nervousness. Actually, I remember I gave an interview to a TV channel 3 days before the election, and they said to me, everybody thinks Beacon's going to win. And I still remember to this day sitting there saying, no, he's not, he's going to lose. And he said, well, how are you so confident? I said, because we've knocked on all the doors, we've talked to people, we know the feeling. I was very confident that Beacon would lose. But at the night of the count, lots of people, you can imagine the tension. And the BNP themselves thought they were going to win all 3 councillors on the Isle of Dogs at the time. At a minimum, they thought they might do even better than that across the borough. And when the vote came through, I can close my eyes now and picture it. The look on Beacon and all his minders' faces, they're slumped, they were broken and defeated.
Oh, I think it was just such a relief. I mean, because the prospect was we were going to end up with more of them, you know, and that was a possibility. So I think everybody was just so relieved, absolutely relieved and elated.
Oh, absolutely wonderful. Everybody was extremely happy. Obviously, there was a change in the control of the council as well. In fact, the Liberal Party got absolutely hammered.
One of my happiest memories is the Friday night after we got rid of Beacon, being locked in the Approach Tavern in Bethnal Green till about 3 o'clock in the morning for our victory celebration. And if anyone's still here at 3 o'clock tonight, enjoying yourself, good luck to you.
Again, I guess not surprised, but elated. You know, people were elated, weren't they? They you know, felt that they had achieved something. You know, that people said you couldn't do these things, that we couldn't force him out. We were pleased, but again, I suppose thinking back, I wouldn't say I was surprised, because I think it was always going to happen in a way if we responded.
Absolutely over the moon. I think it's one of the high spots of my life.
The atmosphere on the day was almost a bit celebratory, and people did feel, I think, more confident, and I think we knew we were going to win. I think if we were because we were in touch with people, we knew that Beacon was going to be kicked out.
It gave back confidence to the community that Tower Hamlets is not the racists don't have a place in Tower Hamlets, and we can live as one community. Or even though we're people of different race and nationalities and faith, we can all live together side by side, and we will not allow any people, racist people, to divide us. I think that feeling came back, and it gave back the confidence to the community.
Well, it was relief. We were trying not to be too triumphant about it because obviously it was a big Labour victory in the borough. We unseated the Liberals from control at the town hall. We had a big job of work to do. We had to try and re-establish people's faith in the Labour Party to provide the housing that was needed and to reassure them that Labour was going to be able to listen to them.
Oh God, the excitement. All of us were outside with the council were happening on the streets. A lot of anticipation, excitement that there will be a change. There was a change. There was a political change in administration. You know, the Liberals had lost and Labour had gained power in 1994. But more importantly is what the fascists will do in Tower Hamlets. Will they be kicked out forever, or will they continue and gain 1 or 2 more seats? When we heard of the results outside, it was fantastic. But more important, the relief when we went into Docklands that night. You know, people were coming out, shaking their hands, celebrating. White, black, Bengali, everyone was celebrating.
Well, one of the good things about Beackon was that he was as thick as 2 short planks. So he came to the council meeting, and he barely uttered a word. And every meeting he came to was an embarrassment for him and for everything he stood for. I was very clear that the Labour Party didn't want to hear him in the council chamber, so at the first meeting we waited outside. We boycotted that meeting. It was run by the Liberals. We said, look, we can't commemorate such a terrible thing happening by pretending it's business as usual. But we then went back in there and used our arguments in the council chamber, made sure that he was very isolated. He can't work with people like that. And we found a lot of goodwill from the workforce, from the trade unions, from the communities, from other communities around the country. So there were people from Jewish communities, Jewish activity groups, who said, hang on a minute, we've got a very deep memory here, and it may not be a substantial Jewish community in the East End anymore, but it's about us as well. And it was a very uniting event in a strange way.
Well, yeah, obviously it was such a relief, but Great Day he wasn't there after all, you know, when he got kicked out, and it was good. It was good, all good.
Waited all the way through the count, and a huge cheer went up and mass celebrations when he got kicked out. People felt wonderful. We felt that really the people of this area, the people of East London, had reclaimed the area for themselves, for normal people in that area, as a mixed area, not one where the Nazis could feel confident on the streets.
And so when the TUC demonstration came through Tower Hamlets, it was just the most exhilarating thing, only outdone by Beackon being beaten at the elections the next month, and of course the Liberals being swept out and replaced by Labour, which one can have one's criticisms of Labour, but it was a considerable step forward from having a sort of semi-racist Liberal council.
Oh, it was amazing! It was amazing. I mean, you know, we did it. Yeah, I always knew it was going to happen. You know, I completely and utterly believed it. You know, there's no way that he was going to stay there. Not if I or the people that were around me, my friends and my colleagues, had anything to do with it. And it was amazing. You know, all the hard work that we put in, all the people who had given their time and, you know, their physicality. Was all worth it. It was brilliant.
Oh, I can feel it now. York Hall. I remember the railings. I can't even walk past York Hall and those railings just by the Museum of Childhood without feeling the excitement. I kind of knew we were going to do it, but there's always that uncertainty. Do you know what I mean? No, absolutely euphoric, shouting, screaming, so excited. You know, hundreds of us there, completely outnumbered the Nazis, completely outnumbered them. You know, and back then our strategy was absolutely to confront them on the streets. That night, didn't even care, do you know what I mean? You get on with it. We're just here to beat you electorally, do you know what I mean? And we did it. So that was really exciting. I remember the celebration, everybody jumping up and down. Do you know what I mean? It's great, lovely, lovely.
Had people kept quiet and been cowed by the intimidation, the atmosphere that was there, that would have been the worst thing, because that would only have allowed racists to grow in confidence. So you have to stand up and be counted always against racism, because if you don't make a stand, other people then won't rally to that. That's why the strike that took place was so important, because it said, you know, in the old slogan, they shall not pass, and that gave people some hope. So today for me it's a question of we've broken the BNP. I'm proud to say that the BNP have never been able to have a visible public presence in Tower Hamlets since. The community has united on several occasions to make sure their successors or offshoot, the EDL, hasn't been able to march in the borough, and that's absolutely fantastic. But every time somebody raises these kind of racist arguments, we have to counter them. And actually, the words I would use, we have to say it's our class, black, white, Asian, no religion, Christian, Islam, all together, uniting against our real enemies.
I think the lesson is that you must speak up. That you absolutely have to speak up, and you mustn't be frightened to be the person to raise their voice or say what might not be popular or whatever.
I'll tell you one of the biggest lessons. We're going to have elections on the 22nd of May, and UKIP will be stirring up anti-immigrant hysteria. It's important that we have unity to stand up to that. But elsewhere in Europe, it won't just be UKIP. It'll be Marine Le Pen in France. It'll be Geert Wilders in the Netherlands. It will be Golden Dawn in Greece. One of the things we achieved, not just with Beacon, but reaching right back to Cable Street, we have said no platform for Nazis. We've made it not respectable to be a Nazi in Britain.
You only have to look around at what UKIP are doing and the way people are playing the race card. Particularly for us in the NUT, you've seen things like the Daily Mail and UKIP saying the fact that there's a problem with school places, there's a shortage of school places, is down to immigrants coming over and taking the places in Barking and Dagenham, which just patently isn't true. As well as being horrible, it patently isn't true. So there is a real lesson that it may not necessarily be the EDL that we're always fighting. I think there's sometimes the Nazis put on nice suits and sound a bit more reasonable. I'm really proud of the work we've done in recent years through United East End, where we really have sort of bonded the community to say, whoever you are, wherever you come from, if you're spreading hate and lies, we'll meet you and we'll see you off. There's no place for you in Tower Hamlets, and that will always be our message, I think.
That we mustn't let people divide us, that people come together and fight back against a common enemy. And I think also the economic situation and the whole way at the moment that the government and UKIP and other people are trying to say that asylum seekers are to blame, that black people are to blame. And it was that kind of thing that led to Beacon being elected on the Isle of Dogs. And to me, one of the lessons is we kicked him out, we stopped any of the others getting elected in East London, and we've got to learn from that here to keep it up here, but also in other parts of the country.
Any time when there are cuts and any time when there's austerity, it creates the soil on which fascists and racists can grow. And I think the lesson is that we've defeated them then, we've defeated them more recently, and we can defeat them again if we campaign together around the things that are important to people: jobs, housing, health service, and so on, and then we can undercut the support that the racists get.
Yes, we have to be united, we cannot be complacent. Although Derek was defeated, I don't think the racism is completely gone from our communities, from our society. People are still there. If they get the opportunity, they will come back. So we have to make sure that we work hard, we remain united, we work together, for the betterment of our community.
Absolutely. That the decent people, the hard-working people, whatever your background is, whatever political persuasion you come from, there's a line you don't cross. And the line is that we are far better integrated, we're far better when we're multicultural, we're far better when we're protecting the working class of these people, the disadvantaged, the downtrodden, and that if we have a common understanding and understand and celebrate our similarities, understand our differences, we are a better community going forward.
I think it showed also that in Tower Hamlets there's actually the real conundrum of it all, and one of the things I like about East London is it's full of contradictions, is that you get a bit of seething resentment and divisive politics from time to time, but then people are very good at coming together, and it showed that we could do that.
I think there clearly are lessons. We've got a government as well which has put people into real crisis and real poverty, with benefit cuts, with the bedroom tax, with things like that. We have organisations like UKIP that are trying to persuade people that the reason they haven't got jobs or they haven't got accommodation is because of immigrants from Eastern Europe this time, different from what the BNP was saying it was the Asian community. And so that is a powerful lesson that can be learned. It isn't by voting for these people who want to scapegoat people that you'll get any better standard of living. All they want to do is divide, attack people, and not stand up for ordinary people.
You know, I'm very involved in Unite Against Fascism nowadays, and was involved recently in organising the Stand Up to Racism march, which took place a few weeks ago. And I think really the lessons that those of us working together in Unite Against Fascism and on Stand Up to Racism, most of us come out of that experience of fighting Beacon and fighting the fascists in Tower Hamlets.
I think the lesson is really to try and make sure that people understand what's going on about the political decisions that are made that affect their lives and their communities. And they can turn to democratic political parties which don't have an agenda of hatred.
You know, now we've got the racists in the corridors of power. We've got UKIP, for goodness sake. So it's quite a for me, it's quite a different story as to way back in the 80s. Now what we're looking at is, you know, we get all these messages left, right and centre, everything's going to be all right, you know, the recession's over. Actually, no, people are suffering, and there's scapegoating of immigrants, there's Islamophobia going on, we can see that clearly. So actually we've got to be quite sophisticated with our arguments, but I do think we need to get out on the streets now, even more so against austerity, because that's what's happening, it's the scapegoating. And that's how the likes of UKIP and our government, who are feeding, they're saying nothing different to UKIP. It's just that UKIP is just a bit more blunt about it, do you know what I mean? So for me, in my opinion, we don't have the boys of the BNP, but we still have serious racism. And look at the rest of Europe with the fascist parties. You know, one thing I remember talking about was we cannot allow them to legitimise themselves and wear their suits and make out they're a legitimate parliamentary party. Now we're starting to see that across Europe. So for me, that's where we've got to aim our campaigns and our anger against austerity to stop the scapegoating.
But of course racism hasn't gone away. Racism is something that we all need to work against. It's against the Christian gospel, the way in which we're called to love one another, and it's against any sense of human decency. So, commemorate a great victory and recommit yourselves to living decently and with a sense of justice and the inclusion of all people, regardless of race or any other issue that people use to divide us. Thank you, go well and God bless.